Spectrovision Radio. Spectrovision Radio.
It was kind of the face of a creature. I'd see it in the curtain and it began to talk to me, really. And I talked to it back, but it was vocally, it was more in the head. And it was very grindingly terrifying that this thing wore me down every night.
Hello and welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast, where we listen to people's fairy encounters. But take heed, we're not talking about winged Tinkerbells here. These are real fairies, real encounters that took people like you and I by surprise. Stay a while and hear their stories. My name is Jo Hickey Hall, and I'm a folklore researcher. Hello everybody and welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast. I'm Jo Hickey Hall and I am joined this time by Mark Jones, who is an experiencer. And Mark, we've kind of been speaking a little bit about something that happened, well, the main story that you wanted to share here, because you've got quite a few actually, but the main story that you wanted to share was something that happened in your childhood. And well, there's lots to say about it, but first of all, welcome and thanks for writing and sharing your.
Well, thank you, Jo. Thanks very much. It's I was really honoured when you said you wanted to chat about it. Thank you.
Oh, not at all. I it's a real privilege for me to hear your story, and it really interested me. And we'll kind of get on to why afterwards. But perhaps you could just start by sharing, what had happened. I should just say that there is a butterfly in here tonight.
Right. So this would be my first experience, although it took decades until a couple of years ago for me to realise it was an experience, really, or, to become much, much more sure that it probably was. So what happened was, when I can date it to between the age of 7 and 9, and my mum had put me to bed, which is why I think I wasn't any older than that. I was probably about 8. And I couldn't have been younger because Mum had sat with me and we chatted, which we often did, and it was really great. And I remember, I don't know what time of year it was, but I was quite restless. Not naughty, you know what I mean? But I was chatting to Mum and I didn't really want to end the chat. And eventually I remember she said, right, well, you've got to go to bed now. So that's what I did. And she left. And I listened for her going downstairs. And I remember her going into the living room. Or she would have gone into the living room. And I would have heard that door close. And I immediately hopped out of bed. And beside my bed, which is at one end of the room, it's a very small room, and it looks towards the door at the other end. So I got out of bed and I knelt down by the bedside cabinet, and in the little cupboard at the bottom is where I kept all my books. And it was all Enid Blyton, really, sort of famous 5, and there might have been some Just William. And I was going to read, which I shouldn't have been doing. And I had my back to the door at that end, and I must have had a bedside lamp that I could have put on to read by, because my curtains would have been shut, unless it was summer and it was light enough. I can't remember. But very soon after looking for the book, I turned around, and I don't know whether I heard something or whether I was just sort of double checking, that the coast was clear and I hadn't been heard. But as I did that, I looked at the door, and these fingers were coming around it, green fingers, very slowly, really, round the door. And I was horrified, petrified. And yeah, I mean, just momentarily, I was just fixed to the spot, really. And I think probably within seconds, though, the fingers actually retracted themselves back around the door slowly again. And so, yeah, I was horrified. And I sort of sat there and I think I waited until I was sort of brave enough to start calling on my mum. And my dad was downstairs too, but tended to call on mum. So and I sort of vaguely remember just starting off very lowly, mum, mum, and I probably had to wait for her to go to the loo in the hallway before she would have heard me, because she would have been in the living room with dad. And she came upstairs, and ordinarily she might have been a little bit annoyed at me for having been out of bed and that, but she obviously, looking back, could see how distressed I was, because she was just immediately very, wanted to calm me basically. And so I would have told her what had happened, and then she took me downstairs. And again, when we got into the living room, I must have explained what happened. And again, my dad, having been at work all day, I would imagine, or if it was the weekend, but I think it was probably a weekday, he would have been a bit annoyed. I mean, he's lovely, my dad, he's great. But if he'd been working hard all day, he would have given me a row. But he must have seen how distressed I was as well, because he was really good. And they calmed me down. And they immediately, I suppose, sort of settled on the idea that it had, understandably, they said it had been an hallucination. And my dad told me a story himself that he'd had a hallucination when he was a child. He'd been staying with his grandparents. He grew up in a different village to me. And my gran, she had, her fourth child, Robert, my uncle, when dad was 10. So he went to live with his grandparents in another village nearby. And he'd woken up one evening in their house with his legs pinned down. When he looked to the end of the bed, there was a coffin, and he could see his granddad in it. But his granddad was actually downstairs, in the living room. So I imagine that was an hallucination. And that's why dad sort of said, don't worry, Mark, it's an hallucination, and blah. And I remember mum and dad, I remember two things. One was really nice, that I got kind of hot milk and biscuits to sort of settle me. Yeah. And then, and then I got taken on a sort of wee tour of the house, where we looked in all the rooms, under the beds, that kind of thing. And the only room we wouldn't have gone into was my sister's, because she would have been fast asleep, because she's 3 years younger than me. I accepted that explanation, which was perfectly logical at the time. And I probably was expected to tell my grandparents at the weekend about it, when we went to lunch at my mum's parents next door, or to my dad's parents in another village. And but I don't really remember telling anyone about it until later on. But it was just an anecdote about having an hallucination as a child. And I just didn't really think anything of it, except it was kind of an amusing anecdote. And I think I told our children about it. And when I was at university, I moved up here in 2005 and went back to university, and I did psychology. So again, it kind of fitted in with some of the stuff I studied, with what the brain can do and sort of stuff like that. But I just had no interest in it having been anything real. And I never had any interest in the reality of, the fae or otherworldly, anomalous creatures, really. I did have a very strong interest in the paranormal, and I did have interest in history, local history, and folklore and folk song, especially traditional folk music, and all those. There's a lot of crossover between those interests, really. Yeah. So I just never, but I never, fairy stories and sort of folklore were just interests, and I kind of thought of things we probably mentioned in the Discord group, like Thomas the Rhymer, and yeah, which I loved, and the Steel Eye Span version, and then there's poems like Dublin Market, Christina Rossetti, and lots of things like that mention otherworldly creatures, Tamlin, but I never thought of them as a reality in any way. I just thought they were kind of metaphors for ways of talking about human behavior, so that was that. Yeah.
So what triggered some another way of looking at it? What was
it was the algorithms of YouTube, because I guess, as I've just said, I have lots of interest in other things, sport or whatever, but with those interests of the paranormal, which is really restricted. I didn't realize I was restricted, but it was ghosts, poltergeist, psychokinesis, telepathy, that kind of thing. But it was all kind of human related, I guess.
Yeah.
And then, folk song, folklore, history, blah, blah. They interest me. I read about them quite a bit, and that sort of thing. One day, about 2 years ago, I have to sort of beg your indulgence in the way I tell the story, I guess, because a couple of years ago I was probably I don't know what I was doing on the laptop one day, and I thought, well, I'll put some music on YouTube, which I do frequently. And so I looked up YouTube, and of course it has all its suggested videos. And there was a video, and I can't remember the title, but it was Professor Ronald Hutton being interviewed about his fairy experience. And I thought, what? And I did. And I was like, oh, for goodness sake. And I have to, I'm sorry, because, and I thought, what's this about? Because I really liked him. I'd seen him in plenty of programs over the years, Victorian Farm, and talking about wassailing and stuff like that. So it was great. But I thought, what is this? But over the next couple of days, I think that, it kept popping up. And I thought, well, I really like it. It's clearly very intelligent. So I gave it a go. And I was really impressed by his sincerity and also by yours. And I thought, well, this isn't this isn't woo-woo. Sort of, It's not what I was expecting. And you were clearly really intelligent and sincere and knowledgeable, So I thought, well, I was just really intrigued. And I wasn't thinking about that experience one bit, but I was intrigued. So I found the website and found the podcast, and I started listening to the podcasts. And again, I didn't realize I didn't realize I was being a bit condescending, probably, but I was a big fan of the Danny Robbins series, like Battersea Poltergeist and then Uncanny. I loved them. And the vast majority of the time with those, I couldn't explain away, they are baffling stories. They really are. And I thought, well, I'll give the Modern Fairy, podcast a go. And I'll try to work out why all these people believe in this stuff. And I found it a really relaxing listen and really fascinating, because again, I started at episode 1, I think, and started working through the first season. I didn't think I'd go with it for very long, but what I was impressed with again was the sincerity of everybody. And then the 2 episodes the first one was a guy who, as a child, had been reading on his bed, and he had the book up against his knees, and he'd looked up at one point, and there had been a little man sitting at the end of the bed, and been scared, and he'd gone to his mum, funnily enough. And I was like, oh, wow, that's weird, because something similar happened to me, although I only saw a hand. I thought that's weird. And then, and then the next one was honestly yours, because the way you described the man you'd seen, particularly in relation to the colour and the ancient, nature of the skin, perhaps, I was like, oh, wow, that just sounded. I only saw a hand, but it described very accurately what I remembered of the hand that I had hallucinated.
Yeah.
And it was because all my life, when I was a kid, especially, if I, when I thought of it, or on those occasions I think I talked about it, I would have said it was a warty hand, because that was my vocabulary, age 8 or whatever I was. And then sort of thinking about it again, having heard your experience and his experience, I was like, it was ancient, the skin, gnarly, kind of, yeah. And I thought, yeah. And I started thinking about it, and I started to realize that there were kind of discrepancies. Well, I feel so, in the hallucination hypothesis, really, in that I'd always imagined that because I was out of bed and I was looking for a book and I was excited and I was feeling guilty at being naughty, then I'd sort of conjured something in my brain to sort of punish me or warn me. But when I thought about the hand, I thought, well, it didn't actually. Well, for one thing, it didn't, because it retracted, it pulled back almost immediately. And I thought, well, that's not a warning finger sort of wagging at me, telling me to get back into bed. It's more like something that didn't want to be seen or didn't want me to see it. Maybe it didn't want to frighten me, or it was frightened itself. And then the second thing I thought was that it didn't make sense to have dreamt, to have hallucinated something that I didn't already believe in, really, because I didn't really have an interest in, like I say, anomalous creatures, particularly. I had all the Usborne books, but the ghost one was my favorite. The ghost one was my favorite. I wasn't that bothered about the monsters one. There's the Loch Ness monster, and I was thinking the other day about Cottingley too.
Right.
That was that was such a big thing even in our childhood, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But even so, I think that was around the time that Francis and they were kind of interviewed as elderly ladies, weren't they? And they were kind of admitting to the fact that the photos themselves had been faked. So I think, again, ghosts were my thing, basically, at that age. And so thinking about it 2 years ago, I suddenly thought, well, why wouldn't I have hallucinated a ghost? It would have made more sense. I would have been, I don't know. But the more I thought about things, the more I thought, well, actually, I think it's more likely it ties in with what all these people that seem really genuine and convincing. And I asked myself, though, because I remember thinking about it again 2 years ago when I was going through these thought processes, and you're like, come on, you're on the verge of saying, yes, I think it is that. And then you're like, am I going too far here? Am I convincing myself for some other reason? Do I want this to be exciting? And I thought, well, I don't really do I want to believe this was real? One, because it's going to change your whole worldview, really, isn't it? It's going to, it affects how you see reality. And then I remember thinking, this is quite funny to me now, is that I remember thinking, oh my God, if it's real, what was it doing in my mum and dad's house? So it wasn't like I wanted to believe initially, but I just came around quite quickly to the idea that, I'd had an experience that I didn't realize I'd had.
Wow. Yeah, that's. And did it change your worldview? How it has.
Yeah, totally. In many ways, anyway. I mean, it's been such a fascinating journey since then, because it just reveals a whole, understanding of reality that you just didn't imagine before. And it maybe opens doors that were closed, in that I had an interest in certain aspects of the paranormal, ghosts and poltergeists and things like that. But it really opens up another sort of, wow, whole kind of universe of what might be possible. What is out there really, and what might. And I don't suppose I'll ever know. But you think, well, there must be there must be an overall kind of theory to existence. What explains it? It's a bit like, through the Discord group, and you know, I ended up reading a lot of books like Demonic Reality by Patrick Harper, and Merrily Harper's Mystery Big Cats too is a fascinating book.
Yeah.
A really good one, because again, you grow up with tales of Surrey puma and things like that, and I always thought, well, if they're out there, and this is a perfectly valid argument, that they're escaped animals from zoos or private collections and stuff, but there's also other ways of looking at them, which I think are really fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, true. As Paul Sinclair's work has shown as well, that there's these creatures out there that seem to be around, and and they don't kind of follow the pattern that live creatures would either.
Yeah.
They can kind of appear and disappear at will, that they're much larger, or seem to have kind of supernatural traits. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And of course, when you're referring to the Discord, you're referring to, because you are in our Modern Fairy Sightings Patreon group, of which there is a Discord. And so, yeah, you're right. I mean, it's a bit of a nightmare for spending on books. We're all a bit, it's just bad, isn't it? Because there are so many great books out there. Mary Harper's being a very good one. And we're always exchanging ideas on, which books to read. So, yeah.
Yes.
In case people didn't know what that was about. But it's very interesting, and looking back at the experience, when you wrote to me, I thought of one instance to do with the color green, which we'll get to in a minute. I suppose as I'm sitting here listening to you, another thing popped into my mind, which was the Incredible Hulk, which of course was green. But perhaps not so much gnarly and ancient, but more kind of a huge hand. But what size was it, and what part of the door? So I'm imagining it's kind of like, the way that you open a door, you kind of grip around. So that's the door, and it's something like this. And did it open the door? What?
The door was open, so you would look down. So when I turned around to face the door, I'm looking kind of down that way, and the door is there when it's closed, but it was open. It was about there, and I can't remember. We always kept the door open. Maybe it was so that Mum and Dad could hear if I got out of bed, or maybe it was because I'd originally been scared or wanted to hear them. I don't know. I can't remember, but it was there. So as you say, it came around. And I think, and I can't say with this like with any certainty, but I think it was either up, like directly above the handle or directly below the handle. It was that kind of height. It wasn't tall. I wouldn't, it wasn't like towards the, any higher than that. So it would have been small, or short, sorry.
So where did the handle sit on the door? Because I mean, like for instance, in a 1930s house, it's kind of above. It's about 3/5 of the way up the door, whereas in other sort of period houses, it's closer to the middle. Just trying.
I would say I've got photos actually, because it's such a this to me is an interesting story, has become an interesting story. I did actually take photos a year or so ago of the bedroom, because although it's been redecorated since, it's essentially the same, exactly the same. And they've even got that bedside cabinet. Mum and Dad have painted it, but apart from that, it's still there in exactly the same position. So I have taken photos. I can send them to you. Just
Great, thank you.
right. But yeah, I think the handle is about halfway up.
About halfway up.
Maybe, as you say, slightly lower, but not much. It's a modern build. It was built in about 1977.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah. No, that gives me a sense of it then. And what kind of feeling did you get? I mean, it's you may not be able to answer that, and that's okay because it is such a long time ago. And you
Yeah,
were between the ages, as you say, of 7 and 9, because you
yeah,
were old enough to read.
yeah,
And yeah.
yeah. I was a little bit. The reason I can say 7 really is because I was slow at reading,
Mhm.
um, which totally changed. I mean, to go back to Enid Blyton, I didn't read because I didn't need to, because my mum would read to me. And then all of a sudden, when I was 7, my grandparents bought me, if I'd go off to camp, they brought it back from their holiday. And mum started reading it. And within a couple of days, I was just like, I cannot wait till tomorrow to hear that next chapter. I have to read that. So
Oh.
that's how I can date when I could read. So it couldn't have been earlier than that. Yeah. So, yeah, were you asking, sorry, Joe, how I
Yeah, I
feel?
was just remembering there about the fact that you said you had listened to that episode, which was "Should I Stay or Should I Go?" And this is where this little boy. I was just thinking about how lovely it was that you were inspired to read, because we do remember those times in our lives, don't we?
Yeah.
Where it's
Yeah. Oh,
suddenly
yeah.
we're kind of like we get onto something, and
Mm,
it's exciting, and it's one of those things that perhaps we take through life with us. And I know for that little boy. Um, and that was in the 70s as well,
all
actually.
right. Yeah.
Reading was his life. He just absolutely
Mm,
adored reading. And what was interesting, I found, was that this was something that he then continued to do throughout his life. He had a job, around, I think, around publishing as well, and he always was around books in his life.
mm,
And just this sense that that was the point that this being turned up.
yeah.
It speaks something of, it's almost like, well, for instance, and I've spoken about this before, but when I see people's auras, or usually more people's sparks in their aura, so you'll get, a ching here, and you get like a sparkle here or here, and they can be different colors. And I always notice it happening when that person is really talking about something they love.
Right.
Almost like the kind of joy around them, or the connection. Something to do with, it's almost like you're seeing something in their consciousness, like something, yeah, chiming with them at the depth of who they are. And so when I think about that story of that little boy, something there was perhaps even attracted to that joy that he had
Mm,
reading, and that's when this little being
yeah.
appeared. So,
Mm,
it's just one theory I have, that they're attracted, these beings seem to be attracted, by that joy that we have for whatever it is that we're, feeling joy for at the time, maybe in another person or a place that we're in, or just having a particularly beautiful moment in our lives and
yes.
feeling something,
Yeah.
and then that's when they appear. But yeah, I'm not sure whether you can tie it to anything that was happening for you at the time. I mean,
Yeah, no, apart from having learned to read, I have thought about that, because you always ask, was was there anything going on at the time? There wasn't really anything out of the ordinary that I recall. I had a very sort of stable, happy childhood. Um, I mean, it's a time of transition anyway, isn't it? Sort of every day is a new adventure, and um, new friends, new freedoms. Um, yeah, that whole period. But I don't recall anything particularly.
mm,
Um, It chimes in really weirdly because I don't know that there's any connection here, but there's a little coincidence there because that was the start of my reading. And I loved reading from that moment on. And Wind in the Willows was another one that I really loved and still do. And I still read that quite, every few years. But the weird thing is, in relation to the boy we've just been discussing, is that I don't do so much now, but I was a freelance proofreader and copy editor
Oh,
for quite a number of years. So
oh,
it's kind of weird that we've both been in publishing to
yeah.
some extent. Yeah, isn't it weird? And our experience is both related to reading.
Yeah, 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 and being around about the same age,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
being in your bedroom when this.
yeah. And I mean, being in the bedroom and reading was what struck me about that episode. And the calling on his mum, too. And also something that I thought differed slightly was I think he said in the episode that even at the time he felt slightly guilty. I might be wrong about this, but that he felt slightly guilty even at the time that he'd kind of been afraid of this being that was clearly benign or seemed to him, yeah, that's a difference because I was terrified. I was like literally frozen to the spot, you
Well,
know.
he was really frightened,
Right.
and he shot out of the bedroom, and at the
Oh, yeah, that's
kind
right.
of stopped and looked back to see if it was still there, which it was. And he kind of, ran into his mother's bedroom, got into bed and had a cuddle with her, didn't tell her what he'd seen. And then he decided he would go back and see if it was still
Right.
there. And of course it
Oh,
wasn't.
wow, yeah,
And that's when he felt like,
yeah,
he felt bad
that's
about
right.
that. But you can understand, why it would be frightening.
Yes,
Of
oh,
course,
definitely. Yeah,
absolutely. I also wanted to pick up on what you mentioned about sort of ghosts and UFOs, and it just struck me
oh,
how, because like you, I had a really good book called, I mean, I bought the Osborne ones for my youngest now because they're great, but I had a book called Fascinating Facts, and if anyone knows how I can get a copy of this,
yeah,
it was made on recycled paper at the time, and I think it was just bought from, I think it was just from like a wholesale supplier that my mum used to go to, and I'd sort of find the occasional interesting thing in there
right.
sometimes, and I got this book,
Yeah,
and it was quite thick, and it was bright yellow,
yeah,
and it had all the really cool things in there, like doppelgangers, and the Mary Celeste, and the abominable snowman, as we called him in those days. And Sasquatch now, or Bigfoot, and your ghost stories and all this kind of thing. But there was a lot of that, and there was a lot of interest for us in those days, wasn't it? Like like
yeah,
you sort of grew up in the 80s mostly,
yeah,
and but the only thing that we ever got to see about fairies was the Cottingley fairies.
yeah,
It
that's
was like,
right.
oh, there were these two little girls who said they'd seen a fairy, but of course they were lying because fairies aren't real. That's all we ever really got about
Yeah,
fairies. So, like
yeah,
you, I never had an interest in fairies either.
right. Yeah,
All
yeah,
ghosts and
yeah, yeah,
spacemen and, you know, all sorts of interesting things like that. So yeah, it is funny how that was just completely it was just completely off our radar, wasn't it,
yeah,
in those
yeah,
days?
totally. That's right. Yeah, and I mean, it's bizarre, isn't it? And getting into this world now, you realize what a diversity of creatures people see. Whereas again, like you say, fairies just meant Cottingley, winged Tinkerbells, basically, wasn't
Mm.
it? And you didn't. And then aside from that, with your kind of your elves and your gnomes and blah blah, that was sort of that was like Ladybird book level stuff. It wasn't real.
Or
And even
Noddy was
yeah, not oh yeah, Noddy, of
that was
course.
kind
Yeah.
of before my time, but
Right, yeah. Yeah, I think I had a noddy book because it'd be my mum's. I think, yeah. I had a Tufty book as well that used to make me
ah.
cry.
One other kind of little I guess, a bit of a sideways look at this. And it's something that struck me when you first contacted, and this is to do with the greenness, was that it may have been because around the time I had been reading about the Green Children of Woolpit, because I was about to interview Jeremy Hart, who has written an excellent book on medieval Irish fairies. So when you wrote, it may have been because I had my head full of the Woolpit, the Green
Oh, yeah.
Children of Woolpit.
Yeah.
And I noted that you had mentioned that you were living in East Anglia, or at
Yeah.
the time when this happened,
Yeah.
which of course is where the Green Children of
Yeah.
Woolpit had
Yeah.
wandered into our realm, if that's what happened. And the young girl had actually, I mean, I'll link the episode here because I did a whole episode on this if people are interested. And there's an excellent book by John Clark that I can highly recommend as well, about the Green Children of Woolpit, which is a fairly recent book. The story goes, just in a nutshell, with these two beings and the relationship to Sanglia, is that the brother, the two children, one was a little boy, the other was the old one was a girl, and the brother sadly died, and the sister ended up staying around the area because she married a man from King's Lynn. So the witnesses tell us, or the people that wrote about what had happened at the time. And so, I was just thinking of the Green Hand, and well, this was in East Anglia, and it was just too tempting not to mention that to you. And it was quite funny when I did, because you said there's not a sort of blood relation link with that, but there was something, wasn't there?
Yeah, there is, because again, this is just a sort of proof of how little I believed, or I didn't ever think of my hand as being fairy, fae at all. It was just an hallucination. So a few years ago, I was running a silly Facebook group, because up here in Scotland, where I now live, we have the Munros, sort of all the hills and mountains that are over a certain height are called Munros, named after the guy that catalogued them. And me and my wife were down in Cambridge one year visiting my parents, and we started this silly joke about, I think we were driving somewhere, and I said, oh, you'll need to watch it on this hill because it's very steep. And she laughed because obviously most of East Anglia is very, very flat. And so I came up with this idea for, because there are some very interesting hills in East Anglia. So I decided to call them the Mundanes instead of the Munros. And it was, yes, terrible pun. And so I started researching, and it went quite well, actually. I ended up doing this Facebook group for a little bit. And I would also not just write about the hills, but I would do little bits on folklore and stuff in a very amateur way. And one of the articles I wrote was about the Green Children of Woolpit, because I just came across it in some book or something. And again, it was just, it's just a fascinating anecdote from history, but it's, what were they thinking of, And so I wrote that, and then my Uncle Richard, he commented on this article and said, well, I went there to a wedding. Your Uncle Peter, who was my grand's brother, he had married a girl from Woolpit, Auntie Margaret. Gosh, must have been sort of mid to late 50s, I'd guess, maybe the early 60s. So that is my very tenuous connection to Woolpit. But she was, I never knew that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I often wonder, I
yeah,
really do think about it quite often, what happened to that family, because,
yeah.
she may have had children.
Yeah, there might be a bloodline there.
There could be a bloodline there, and I do wonder if people are walking about
Yeah.
completely unaware that, they go back to this
Yeah,
family.
that's right. Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
it'd be really cool to find out at some point.
yeah,
I just feel like something's going to turn up at some point with more evidence for that, because I know
yeah,
that, there's people have a very skeptical view and offer various reasons as to, why we shouldn't really, think of them as otherworldly beings. But anyway, I like to see them that way. I think that there's quite a lot of circumstantial evidence, I suppose, in the way that they were spoken about that makes me feel that they were. I don't know what this hand would be. What do you think? What do you think it is?
Well, I assume it's something related to the Fae, now, and quite, as certain as you can be, really, because I don't particularly think that the hallucination idea holds totally. I don't see why I would have done. I never hallucinated again.
Yeah.
There wasn't anything going on physically or psychologically. I mean, I'm saying that. I don't really have a right to say that. You know what I mean? I'm not sufficiently qualified to say that, but that's my feeling anyway. I can't. So, yeah, that would be my feeling.
And did you ever have any strange dreams as a child? Did any of this ever enter your dream state?
No, I don't think so. But the one thing, if you want me to lead on to this, I did have strange dreams as a child, and if I've forgotten a major one, I'll let you know. But I don't think that the hand really fed. I just didn't believe in that hand as being real for decades because my mum and dad were just so comforting, understandably.
Yeah.
I just, accepted their explanation, which was great. And maybe it was for the best in some ways because maybe I would found it hard growing up with that kind of belief, that it was real kind of thing. Talking to the dream, I hope when I told a story on Discord because I never thought I had paranormal experiences growing up. Like I say, and I would love to have seen a ghost, but I never did. And then again to advertise the Discord group, again, you asked the question once, and I don't recall quite what the question was because my answer wasn't entirely relevant to what you'd asked, but something about the question suddenly reminded me of something. And I hope I did write about it on the Discord, and I'll talk about it now if you want. But even when I wrote about it, I was like, God, they're gonna think, no, okay, Mark, you've gone far enough now, because later I would imagine I was 11, 12, 13. It was early teens, I think. I was early at secondary school. I had a very prolonged, I can't tell you how long, but more than weeks. I mean, maybe a couple of months or so, slightly longer. I had this weird experience where every night there was this kind of creature that I would see in the curtains. And I didn't have any, recently I've been thinking I didn't really have any kind of other fears or other scary sort of, like any child, I was scared of the dark from time to time, but then you wake up in the morning and it's light and you put it behind you. But this thing, I mean, maybe this, maybe, you know what I mean? I can't prove that this was real and I don't know, but I believed it and didn't believe it at the same time because I'd see it in the curtain and it began to talk to me really. And I talked to it back, but it wasn't vocally, it was more in the head, but it was like we knew what the other was saying kind of thing, but it wasn't vocalized. But it was kind of the face of a creature. And the two things recently, this will sound very dark because it was actually terrifying at the time. And it was very grindingly terrifying. The hand had been very terrifying, but only momentarily, only for that hour, those few minutes when I saw it and then sat there waiting for my mum, calling on my mum, and then it wasn't. Whereas this thing wore me down every night. And I remember speaking to you, it was really fascinating in the group because I thought, oh, they're going to think this is ridiculous. But it had told me that its name was you. So I am you. And yeah. And then you said that quite often, creatures will give riddles for their names, like I am me or I am you, all that sort of thing. I was really fascinated.
Yeah.
And that and that wasn't a dream. I was awake and it kept me awake. And the other thing was, and it just went on night after night. And I remember I was old enough to chastise myself. I was like, you're too old for this, you're too old to have this kind of night terror, this ridiculous, you gotta get out of it. But it wasn't, it was very persistent. And in terms of look, and this is the funny bit really, the two things I would say it kind of looked like within the folds of the curtains. I must talk about the curtains in a second, but it was like either, do you remember Battle of the Planets, the cartoon? It's just that there was this creature in it and it was like a face. It was like a black face, like a ghoul kind of. And then the second thing, it was sort of in between this ghoul thing. And I don't think I thought this at the time. But thinking about it now, it's kind of like this ghoul thing. And it was kind of like, do you remember the Black Rabbit from Watership Down? And,
it makes me cry every time.
Yeah, me too. And just don't play Art Garfunkel singing that song. Terrible. So anyway, now I would describe it like that. But it was actually terrifying. And thinking about it now, when you said something on Discord and it reminded me of it, you start thinking and you think, well, people would say that's pareidolia, which is which is fair enough. But the curtains were patterns. They were kind of blue, cheap kind of nylon, I guess. It was quite a rough fabric, and then they had aeroplanes on. So again, it could have created something, but for one thing, it came and it went. You did, and I retained the curtains for a long time after that. So when it went, I didn't, and it wasn't like I was hanging the curtains in any different way. It was around for a long time, and it was just, I wouldn't say looking back, it was threatening at the time itself, but it didn't care about my feelings. I mean, even if I was thinking of it, even if I imagined it, it didn't care about me being scared. It was just going to sit there, kind of thing. And so again, I thought, well, there just wasn't anything going on that I would create that for a purpose and then sustain it for as long as I did. And I just kept thinking, well, this is ridiculous. You've got to stop thinking like this, And I can't remember if I told my mum or not. I honestly can't, but mum's very caring, as you'll realize. But again, if I did tell her, I think she may have told me, look, you've got to get out of that, you're too old. Or I might just sort of run in my head how it might have been if I told her and decided, no, that's what she'd say, kind of thing. Yeah, when it left, I think I'd written about this on Discord. And then after this, there was that explosion of interest in the Sandown Clown, which I'd never heard of. I mean, I just never came, and that's just such a fascinating case. And it's so different to you in many ways, except that when you left, it told me. It said, "Right, I'm going now," and I'm going now, and don't ever mention me to anybody, because and I think it either said explicitly or it was inferred. The one, people wouldn't believe me and I just looked stupid. And then the second reason, I got a very distinct feeling that it would be bad for me if I did ever tell anyone about it. And I never did. And I existed, whereas I put the hand completely behind me and, and remembered it, but never had any more fear of it. With you, I did, because if ever I thought of it or thought of telling anybody, until we got, till I said on the Discord, I would go, no, I'm not doing that. Even though I told myself, so you exist in this weird situation where you believe in it enough not to tell anyone, but you're also telling yourself, well, I must have imagined that. You know what I mean? It's the weirdest thing. And I don't really know why. I suppose I don't live there anymore, maybe, and it's so long ago that I felt comfortable in talking about you. My only worry was that people would go, oh my God, that isn't, that's too far, Mark. But the thing about the Sandown Clown was just that everything else about that's quite different, except that it's a very extreme kind of being, it's a very unusual being to have seen. But the Sandown Clown seems to have been very benign and takes, I feel like it was there in Sandown for some kind of purpose or mission.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and it came across the two children, and then particularly with the girl, sort of formed an attachment and cared for her, And when the Sandown Clown leaves, he says, you won't see me now, but you will see me 3 times. However, he kind of predicts the future. He says very clearly this will happen.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because that part of the story, which is kind of the second part, which we heard from Paul T. Wilson when I interviewed him, lots of other people have come back and said that wasn't the real Fae, that second part we can't say for sure. I mean, of course, we can't say for sure any of it happened, of course, and that's the whole point with these experiences, But that was the really interesting part of what we heard from Paul T. Wilson, and yet so many people have suggested that. Well, more recently, and I don't think we spoke about this on the Discord, but the BBC's Uncanny apparently spoke to somebody that said that they were the real Fae, and that this real Fae, who may be the real Fae or not the real Fae, had said that they had not spoken to Paul T. Wilson, and that they never saw the Sandown Clown again, and that they can't remember the details of what happened because aged, I think it was 10, they had a horse riding incident and lost their memory. Whether any parts of that are true or not, I cannot say. But it is the quality. I believe in the original story, and I think it is a very, very interesting. There's something very strange about it. It's weird that it happened on an island as well. I mean, I know coming from an island, there's some very strange energies knocking about on islands, and I hope it's one of those that we get to learn more about. But I think, I'm really interested in the you, as you mentioned there, the name itself being a kind of motif that comes up in folklore of this. They'll give a name, but it's kind of one that could then be twisted back on itself and used in various kind of riddlesome ways, let's call them. When the person then begins to start to talk with the being, it's just nonsensical then because of the name, like you. And of course, as we know, the power of names is very strong. We see it in folklore. Like, for instance, everyone knows about Rumpelstiltskin, and he won't give his name, and so it's a kind of a way of masking the name or masking the power of the name, because if somebody knows your name, it holds resonance. And So that's a very interesting aspect to what you experienced there. And I just wondered a couple of things really. You said that he was kind of sitting there, so sort of within the curtains.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
wondered kind of how big he, I'm assuming he might have been, and
yeah,
what sort of shape, and then also what kind of vibe you felt from him. I know
yeah.
it's scary, and there was this kind of telepathic connection, and I totally
Mm.
get that. But yeah, I wondered what sort of a character you think they were.
Right. Well, in terms of size, um, maybe again, I find it difficult to explain how sort of what
Yeah,
size the window was, but it's not a big window. It's not it's a fairly average bedroom window for a sort of 1970s house, really.
yeah.
And I'd say it took up about, I mean, actually, less than a third, maybe. But that's quite hard to judge at this distance, to be honest, thinking about it.
Yeah.
And it certainly loomed large in my, you know what I mean? Because it was scaring me, it kind of loomed, yeah, maybe a little less than a third.
And did you get an
Then,
impression of what it looked like?
yeah, it was a very dark shadow. So it was a very dark shadow. So again, you'd want to say it was pareidolia, but it wasn't there before and it wasn't there after it said it would leave. So there's no reason why you would stop seeing it, why it would be so dark in that particular fold of the curtain.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah. And then for vibes, um, yeah, it just sat there really. I say sat, it was just a face really. I mean, I couldn't see, I'm not sure that I could see eyes or anything, but it was, yeah, it was, it wasn't like a body or anything like that. It was more it was more a face really, or at least that's how it seemed. And then it was just very, it just sat there. It was just intimidating, really. Again, I'm always coming up with slightly comical analogies, but in thinking about it, since I mentioned it the first time, I feel like I was like a squirrel in the hole of a tree, peeking out, and that had been my home for a little while. And then a big owl comes and sits on the branch just outside, and it's not a nice owl, and it's frightening the squirrel, but the owl doesn't care. The owl's like, well, put up with it, I'm here, kind of thing. So it's a daft analogy, but it had that kind of vibe of something that didn't care it was scaring.
Really
Yeah,
interesting. I'm
yeah.
glad you shared that,
Oh, good.
Um, yeah, I think it's really helpful to actually have, the sense of the squirrel
Oh,
and
right,
the
good.
owl. And of course, I can't help but think of Mike Clelland's work when you mention owls, of course,
Right.
which is this idea that it's that and I know you didn't say that you saw an owl, but just the idea of the
Yeah,
owl of kind of being a screen memory for something else. I'm also thinking, again, of course, it's the window.
yeah,
Window.
that's right.
And you're at that threshold in your age as well, sort of going through
Oh, yeah,
puberty, which
that's
is always
right.
a really big time, and where
Yeah,
a lot of people have these sorts of experiences.
yeah,
I don't know whether you moved school around that time as well, but it's often the time that people move from primary to secondary or
yeah,
to secondary and
yeah.
all this kind of thing.
It could have been, yeah, because I can't completely date it,
Mm.
but yeah, I do think I was between about 11 and 13.
Mm.
So I was either at the start or towards the middle of secondary school.
Mm.
And I had lots of friends, and I, I had lots of friends, but I didn't really enjoy school that much during those years. I wasn't in trouble or anything, but it was when I got into the fourth and fifth year, I think things became much more interesting for whatever reason, and I suppose I had to take an interest.
Well, sometimes at that age you can choose your own subjects, which
of
you
course.
can, if there's a class where people are being really annoying or something, or you just don't like the teacher, you can just say goodbye to those bits that you're not enjoying and do something with your crew that you enjoy being with.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's probably true, actually, because I mean, like I say, I had good friends. I only had one teacher that I really didn't get on with, but that was more a laugh than anything, really. I'm sure he would probably have said the same. We just wound each other. So it wasn't like there was no trauma, but it just wasn't the most interesting period of my life, really. At school, anyway. Yeah.
It's very interesting. So I don't know, is there a quality of kind of fear or intimidation when you think about him now?
The teacher, do you mean?
No,
about you.
About you.
Sorry. That was a lovely misunderstanding. Thinking about my maths teacher. Sorry. Not so much as it was. I'd forgotten about this until the other day when I knew that our interview was coming, our chat was coming up. And I suddenly thought, well, actually, a few years ago, I've always written. I've always really enjoyed writing. And I suppose I've always tended towards ghost stories. Weird stuff. Well, not terribly weird, but And I did think a few years ago, I'd been writing down sort of notes of stories I might get around to writing, and one of them was about you, because I thought, oh, that would be a great subject. But again, I did. I mean, you're a grown adult now, and I don't, like I said, I don't know what the difference is now, but even back then, just a few years ago, I thought, no, I'm not gonna tempt fate by writing about that, because it's a bit too. Yeah, the memory, whether it came from, I can't say whether it was an entity outside of myself or whether I created it. I don't think I can hazard a guess on that one. But either way, the fear remained with me, ever since, really. Like I say, it's a weird fear because on the one hand, you're like, oh, I created that. It was just a childhood fear. You know what I mean? At the same time, you're too frightened as a 40-year-old as I would have been at the time, in my 40s, to write about it. And I think, again, it's through finding you and the group and discussing experiences that I realized that other people had at worse, bigger traumatic episodes than that. And it makes you think, oh, yeah, that was traumatic for me at the time. I lost a lot of sleep. It was very grind, like I said earlier on, it ground me down, because you couldn't sleep. And it wasn't a school, I don't want to go to school in the morning, bad kind of, phase. I just don't feel it was particularly connected to anything as concrete as that.
So it was more kind of the presence of it rather than anything it was saying to you. It was more that it was there and you knew it was kind of.
Yeah, really. I mean, it did say stuff, and unfortunately now I can't remember anything it said apart from when it said it, apart from near the start when it announced, its name was you, and then at the end when it said it was going. But I know, I think I told it to go away, can't believe me kind of thing, and it would say no. But it's hazy memories for what it actually said in that middle period. Yeah, it was just deeply unpleasant,
Yeah, that is. But how does it feel to talk about it now?
Fine. I don't have any more kind of, for want perhaps of a better word, I don't have any superstitious fears of anything bad happening. But again, like I feel comfortable talking about it. And I don't even feel traumatized, like I said just then, other people have much worse. I'm now like at a stage where it was a long time ago. It was horrible at the time, but it's not damaged me in the long term. I don't think remotely, apart from the fact that it took to this point where I could be like that, really, I guess.
Yeah.
But it didn't impinge on anything else in my life.
No.
It didn't,
Good. These have an effect, don't they? They certainly have an effect. For the full-length version, join us and support on Patreon, Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast. Thank you very much, Mark. And the other thing I wanted to mention was your beautiful music. You really have a talent for songwriting, and you're into the kind of 70s sort of psychedelia and folk. Well, I guess psych folk, would it be?
Yeah, I guess so.
Psych folk.
Yeah.
You've got a real talent for both composing songs and writing them. So if you would like me to play out with one of your songs, I'd be entirely honoured. But just thank you for sharing it with us, because
I'm really happy
great.
thank you, because two things really. I've always played guitar, well, since I was 16, and really enjoyed it. And I've written lots of songs over the years, but it's it's the last couple of years through the group, through the website, through finding you through Ronald, Professor Ronald, on that video, on the video that popped up on YouTube. My horizons have exploded in ways that I didn't realize they would. And I've learned so much from the other members, and it's broadened my spirituality, and, because it, in so many ways that I don't consider, obviously, I'd rather not consider myself as hugely talented or anything, but I feel like the songs that I do write now, they're a little bit more meaningful than the ones I used to write. They're not that, I'd like to think they're a bit better than the ones I used to write anyway. But that's not to say I think they're any good.
I do think they're really great. They are really great, and not just anyone can write songs like that. So I think you definitely have a skill there. But it's been really lovely to get to know you as well, and just really appreciate you sharing these stories.
Thanks. Yeah.
It just always makes me realise how many of us just have had these experiences either as children, things that we've thought about and never been able to make sense of, or in our families, and all those sorts of experiences that leave us with questions. So I really appreciate you sharing this.
Well, thank you. It's been, I'm so grateful, and honoured that you'd want to listen to them. And again, it's validating, isn't it, for you to want to hear me talk about them.
And for me to hear them from you, because it's validating for me and the experience, as I'm listening to the kinds of things that you experienced. It draws me back to strange presences in the house where I grew up too, and what that was like. So it's it is validating to hear someone else share. So I know that other people listening and watching this will feel the same. So thanks again.
No, thank you.
Yes, and I shall speak to you soon.
Yeah, brilliant.
I'll see you in the group.
The
butterfly is still there.
Wow, amazing.
Seems quite happy.
Yeah. We'll sing a song of summer solstice on this the dawning of the longest day, and dance in praise of the sun goddess who lights and warms the land with golden rays. All life delights in dappled forests, each meadow green and quiet stream, and between the cracks of pavements grow the weeds. We'll sing a song of summer solstice on this the morning of the longest day, and raise our hands in supplication in hope of healthy harvests on the way. But for now let's feast in friendship and feel the heat beneath our feet, or under city pavements find the beach. And from behind the veil another Yes, the evening of the longest day, in meadows green or dappled forests, or on urban pavements, it is but the same. By quiet streams or dappled forests, or on urban pavements, yes, it's just the same.
Thanks so much for listening and watching. If you enjoy the podcast, please consider joining us on Patreon for dozens more episodes of unreleased bonus content, monthly online events, and a private chat. We are a warm, supportive community, and it really helps to support the project. Find us on patreon.com/the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast.
Spectre Vision Radio.